Everything you know about cold says this should be impossible. No hearth, no warm cabin, just wet wood, iron nails, and an open Arctic sky that wants you dead. And yet voyage after voyage, they pushed wooden dragons across water so cold it could stop a heart in minutes, and came back alive. You are standing on an open wooden ship in freezing seas, and the first thing you notice is not fear, it is exposure. There are no walls around you, no cabin to step into, no doorway to shut against the wind. Nothing separates your body from the moving air except layers of cloth and hides that already feel thin against the cold. The sky hangs low and heavy, filled with pale light and damp air that offers no warmth. It presses downward rather than opening upward. Beneath you, the sea stretches in every direction, dark, restless and unmarked, offering no horizon you can trust and no sense of scale that suggests safety. You're standing on a narrow strip of wood, floating in a world that does not adjust itself for human endurance. And there is nowhere else to go. The cold reaches you before panic has time to form. It does not arrive with violence. It does not shock the body into alarm. Instead, it advances patiently, rising from below. The wet wooden deck beneath your boots pulls heat downward, drawing it out through leather soles and wool socks, through every layer meant to hold warmth close. The planks are slick with spray, darkened by moisture, cold enough that you feel them even while moving. The chill works upward in stages. It settles first in your feet, then your ankles, then your calves. It pauses, as if testing resistance, then continues. Your knees stiffen. Your thighs feel heavier. The cold does not stab or burn. It presses, constant, dull and unhurried. Your hands are next, even while working, gripping oars, hauling rope, steadying yourself against the roll of the ship. The cold seeps inward. Fingers lose precision. Movements slow. Tasks that were automatic become deliberate. Then your face, cheeks, nose, the thin skin around your eyes and mouth. The wind finds what clothing cannot cover, biting sharply there, drying skin even as it numbs it. The ship beneath you is long and narrow, more spine than body, cutting through unsettled water. It flexes constantly as waves pass beneath the hull. Not violently, not dramatically, but endlessly. There is no moment of complete stillness, no pause long enough to forget that the ground itself is alive beneath your feet. This is not a platform. It is a structure that responds to the sea every second it remains afloat. This is a Viking longship in the cold northern seas. Wind moves freely across the deck, unbroken by walls, rails, or permanent barriers. It slips beneath cloaks and through hoods, carrying fine drops of salt spray that sting exposed skin. Each wave strikes the hull with a deep hollow sound that resonates through timber and bone alike. The vibration travels upward through the ship, into your legs, your spine, your jaw. You do not just hear the sea, you feel it. The air smells of salt and wet wood, of tar sealing the seams, of wool that never fully dries, of sweat trapped beneath layers that cannot be removed without risk. It is the smell of sustained effort in a place where moisture never quite leaves and nothing truly rests. Your eyes move across the deck without conscious direction. You look for something familiar, something reassuring, a fire pit, a brazier, even a small sheltered flame tucked away out of the wind. There is nothing. No glow, no smoke, no place where warmth gathers. The deck is open and exposed. Shields line the sides of the ship, their painted surfaces faded and streaked with salt, now tools rather than symbols. Oars rest in their ports, darkened by water in use. Ropes lie coiled near your feet, stiff with cold, rough against bare skin. A single mast rises from the centre of the ship, smooth with moisture, radiating cold like stone. The sail is folded for the moment, heavy, dark, saturated with water. When it is raised, it will not shelter the deck. It will catch the wind and drive the ship forward, deeper into cold air and harder weather. This ship offers no shelter, and that is deliberate. The deck shifts beneath you as the hull rolls, and you adjust your stance without thinking. Everyone aboard does the same. Balance here is not a conscious act. It is a reflex, learned through repetition. To lose it is not merely inconvenient. A fall means soaked clothing, and soaked clothing in this cold becomes a quiet danger, one that does not announce itself immediately. Below the deck boards, water sloshes continuously in the bilge. That is where the cold settles. The lowest part of the ship is always wet, always darker, always colder. The air there is heavy and damp, pulling heat away faster than anywhere else aboard. Everyone understands this without explanation. You stay upright, you stay moving, you stay above it whenever possible. There is nowhere designed for comfort, no bench shaped for rest, no padded surface, no space intended for ease. Even when sleep eventually comes, it will be shallow, fragmented, and shared. Most of the time, you are working, rowing against water that resists every stroke, hauling ropes that bite into numb hands, adjusting sail as the wind shifts, without warning, bailing water that never stops finding its way inside the hull. Work is constant, because when movement slows, the cold advances, and even then, it never fully retreats. Your fingers ache while they work. Your face feels tight, numb at the edges. Your jaw clenches without you noticing. Shoulders hunch instinctively, not against pain, but against exposure. The cold does not hurry, it does not need to. It settles in and waits, draining heat patiently, hour after hour. The sea does not need to be violent to be deadly. It only needs to be persistent. You look at the others around you. Their faces are weathered, focused and calm. Movements are economical, practiced, efficient. No one looks surprised by the conditions. No one scans the deck for warmth that does not exist. This is not bravado, it is familiar. They are not enduring something unexpected, they are doing something they understand. What feels most unnatural is not the hardship, it is the absence of fire. In a world without engines, insulation or artificial heat, fire is central to survival. Fire dries clothing. Fire restores the feeling of numb hands. Fire transforms preserved food into something easier to digest. Fire gives the body a chance to recover when cold presses inward from every direction. And yet on this ship there is none, not even a small flame hidden away. These voyages were not brief coastal crossings between friendly shores. Viking ships moved across the North Sea, through icy fjords, across the Baltic, and into the open ocean toward Iceland, Greenland, and distant coasts. They sailed through freezing rain, sleet, snow, fog, and sudden storms. Some journeys lasted days, others stretched into weeks, with no certainty of relief ahead. All without fire, no heated cabins, no cooking flames, no reliable source of external warmth at sea. To a modern observer, this feels impossible. It invites the assumption that these sailors endured the cold simply because they lacked better options. But that assumption fails under scrutiny. The absence of fire was not ignorance, it was a decision. Fire aboard a wooden ship sealed with tar and packed with rope, wool and hides was not comfortable. It was a catastrophe waiting for a single mistake. One tipped container, one sudden roll, one strong gust and the vessel would become a float inferno, with no escape and no remedy. A single powerful gust could transform the ship into a floating fire, leaving the crew trapped without rescue. So warmth had to come from somewhere else. From clothing engineered to hold heat even when wet. From constant movement that kept blood circulating. From shared sleep that slowed heat loss. From food chosen for energy rather than pleasure. From planning that treated landfall as recovery, not interruption. And above all, from understanding. From accepting exposure instead of expecting relief. From working with the sea rather than trying to conquer it. From knowing that survival was not about fearlessness, but about discipline. Repeating the right actions, hour after hour, while conditions remained hostile. The ship rises and falls beneath you. The wind does not ease. The sea does not pause. Warmth does not arrive. What exists instead is a system, deliberate, practiced, and shared. designed to keep human bodies alive on an open deck in freezing water without fire and without shelter. And as the hours stretch on, that reality settles in fully. There is no hidden source of comfort waiting to be discovered, no moment when the cold breaks on its own, no signal that relief is coming, simply because time has passed. The ship keeps moving, the sea keeps pressing inward, the cold keeps searching for weakness, and every person aboard carries the same question with them, quietly, constantly, through every hour of the voyage. On an open ship in freezing seas, with no fire and no shelter, how do you stay alive out here? First, they accepted a brutal truth. Fire and ships don't mix. What feels most unnatural is not the cold itself. Cold behaves in ways the body understands. It announces itself through sensation. It sharpens the skin, stiffens the joints, numbs the fingers, and tightens the muscles. Blood pulls inward to protect the core. The nervous system recognizes the threat and responds automatically. The cold is uncomfortable, but it is legible. It follows rules the body has evolved to manage. The absence of fire does not. It does not arrive with pain or warning. There is no single instant when the mind realizes something is wrong. Instead, it is revealed gradually, through everything that fails to happen. Through moments when relief should arrive but never does. Through instincts that reach for something familiar and find only empty air. Fire is not something humans actively notice most of the time. It is assumed. It is the background condition of survival. For tens of thousands of years, human life has been organized around flame. Camps form around it. Meals end beside it. Bodies recover near it. Fire marks the center of safety, the place where effort stops and recovery begins, until it is gone. Standing on the deck of the ship, soaked by spray and cut by wind, the body waits for fire without realizing it is waiting. After hours of exposure, there should be a transition. There should be warmth that does not require effort. There should be a moment when stiffness loosens without movement, when shivering ends without work. But nothing changes. The deck remains cold, the air remains damp, the wind remains unbroken. Time passes, but conditions do not soften. The realization settles slowly and heavily. There will be no external relief. Not later, not tonight, not at all. This absence is not ignorance. These men know fire intimately. On land, Viking life revolves around it. Longhouse hearths burn continuously through winter. Iron is worked in forges. Tar is boiled and poured. Beacons are lit along coastlines. Fire is mastered, used and depended upon. But at sea, it is deliberately excluded. That decision was made long before this voyage began, before the keel was laid, before the mast was stepped, before the sail was raised. It was made by shipbuilders and sailors who had learned across generations what fire does on open water. A Viking longship is not designed to contain flame. It is built from oak planks sealed with tar and pitch, substances distilled from pine roots and rich in resin. These sealants repel water effectively, but they are also highly flammable. Once ignited, they burn fiercely, producing thick smoke and intense heat that spreads rapidly along wooden rope. The ropes that hold the mast and control the sail are twisted from hemp or bast fibres, often treated with oils or tar to resist rot. The sail itself, woven from wool, is coated with mixtures of fat ochre and sometimes pitch to make it windproof and water resistant. Furs, hides and woolen clothing fill the deck. There are no compartments, no fire breaks, no safe zones. In practical reality, the ship is nothing more than fuel kept afloat. Even a small controlled flame, a brazier for warmth, a pot of embers for cooking, would be an unacceptable risk. The environment offers no stability. The deck pitches and rolls constantly. The wind shifts without warning. A single spark lifted by a gust could land in a fold of sailcloth, a tarred rope, or a fur cloak. Once fire takes hold, there is no solution. Buckets are few. Water cannot be thrown upward easily. Panic spreads faster than coordination, and the surrounding sea offers no escape. In near-freezing water, immersion leads to shock and hypothermia within minutes. A burning ship does not offer choices, only outcomes. This is not theoretical knowledge. Archaeological evidence from ship finds like the Skulderlev longships, recovered from Roskilde Fjord, shows vessels built light, open and flexible, with no features intended to isolate or manage onboard fire. Experimental voyages using reconstructions of these ships have confirmed the same conclusion. Flame aboard creates uncontrollable risk long before it offers comfort, so fire is not limited, not minimized, not carefully managed. It is excluded entirely. That exclusion reshapes everything about life at sea. Without fire, wetness becomes permanent rather than temporary. There is no point where damp clothing is reset to dry. Moisture accumulates instead of being driven out. The body exists in gradients of wetness rather than returning to a neutral state. Without fire, night behaves differently. On land, darkness collapses inward toward flame. Fire creates a center, a place to face, a place to gather. At sea, darkness spreads evenly. There is no glow, no anchor for the eyes. The horizon disappears. The water and sky merge into a single, flat blackness. Without fire, time loses its natural punctuation. There is no cooking to mark the end of labour, no hearth to signal safety. Exposure does not pause. The voyage becomes continuous rather than segmented. And because fire normally provides both physical relief and psychological reassurance, something else must replace it. That replacement is not warmth, it is discipline. Routine, planning and shared understanding take over the role fire usually plays. The crew does not wait for comfort. They operate systems. They accept that the ship is not a place of recovery, but a place of transit. Fire belongs to land. The ship's purpose is to reach it. This is why Viking voyages are planned in stages. From Norway to Shetland, from Shetland to the Faroes, from the Faroes to Iceland. Each stretch of open water ends where flame can burn safely again. The absence of fire at sea is not endless. It is deliberate, and it is temporary. The men around you do not search the deck for warmth, because they know where warmth belongs. Their calm is not indifference. It is aligned with reality. Fire here would be danger, not comfort. So the ship moves on, cold, open, exposed, toward the places where fire waits on shore. And with that truth accepted, survival depends on everything that comes next. Second, they learn to wear their warmth instead of building it. What you are wearing is not just an outfit, it is a tool. It is a survival system designed for a world where weather is not a backdrop, but an active threat waiting for a mistake. Nothing on your body is there by accident. Every layer, every stitch, every choice of material exists because people before you learned, slowly, painfully, and often fatally, what happens when rain, wind, and cold arrive together and refuse to leave. These clothes are not theoretical solutions. They are answers written in loss. Out here, on an open wooden ship in freezing seas, clothing is not about identity or status. It is the only barrier between your body and conditions that will kill you quietly if given enough time. The cold does not strike all at once. It creeps. It moves like water, searching for weaknesses. A loose sleeve, a gap at the neck, a thin seam stretched too far. Clothing is how you deny it entry. Closest to your skin, you might wear linen when conditions allow, but linen is not what keeps you alive. The real work is done by wool. To understand why you are still functional hours into this voyage, you have to understand the wool itself. This is not the soft, processed wool of modern clothing. It comes from northern sheep bred for survival, not appearance. The fibres are coarse and heavy. When you touch them, they feel oily. That oil, the lanolin, has been left intentionally in the wool. It has not been stripped away. You can smell the animal in it. You can feel the grease on your hands. That grease matters. When freezing spray hits your chest, the water does not soak in immediately. It beads on the surface. Some of it rolls away. The rest is slowed, buying your body time. But the true strength of wool lies deeper. The fibres themselves are crimped, bent like tiny springs. When spun into yarn and woven into cloth, they do not lie flat. They push against one another, creating countless microscopic air pockets. Your body heats that trapped air, and the fabric holds it in place. You are surrounded by your own warmth, and when the water finally does get through, as it inevitably will, wool behaves unlike almost any other material available to the medieval world. The fibres resist collapse. They continue trapping air even while wet. As they absorb moisture, they release a small amount of heat through a natural chemical reaction. For a brief moment, your clothing does not just resist the cold, it pushes back. The tunic you wear is simple in shape, but deliberate in design. Fabric is expensive. It takes months of labour to produce, so it is not wasted on curved cuts. The tunic is built from rectangles and squares, assembled efficiently, but the human body is not square. So gauze, triangular inserts, are sewn into the sides and under the arms. These additions change everything. They allow you to lift your arms to haul rope or manage the sail without pulling the tunic up and exposing your core. Warm air stays sealed inside. Cold air stays out. These small pieces of fabric protect your abdomen and back, the places where heat loss is most dangerous. Your trousers follow the same logic. They are loose enough to allow blood to circulate freely. Tight clothing restricts circulation, and restricted circulation invites cold injury. But looseness creates risk near the feet, so the lower legs are wrapped. From knee to ankle, long woven strips of wool are wound tightly around the calves. These leg wraps seal the gap between trousers and boots, stopping wind and spray from driving upward. They also provide gentle compression, helping blood return from the feet after hours of standing on a moving deck. Circulation is heat. Over everything comes the cloak. This is the most valuable garment you own. It is a heavy rectangle of wool that has been fulled, beaten and compacted while wet until the fibres lock together into a dense, wind-resistant barrier. Rain does not pass through it easily. Wind struggles to penetrate it at all. You do not wear it loose. You pin it at your right shoulder with a heavy brooch. This leaves your working arm free while sealing the rest of your body behind a wall of fabric. When the wind rises, you turn your left shoulder into it and let the cloak take the force. The brooch is not a decoration. It is hardware. It allows the cloak to be adjusted as conditions change. Wrapped tighter, doubled across the chest, sealed shut. At night, the cloak becomes your shelter. You sleep on the deck, pulling it over your head, trapping heat and blocking mist. There are no cabins. You carry your protection with you. Hands and feet are where the cold tries hardest. Your boots are simple leather, soft-soled and stitched rather than nailed. This lets your feet feel the deck beneath you, adjusting balance instinctively on wet planks. Inside, wool socks made with nalbinding, knotted rather than knitted, retain strength even when damaged. Around your feet is dried grass. It sounds primitive. It is not. Grass creates insulation. It absorbs moisture. And when it becomes wet, it is replaced. You manage the environment inside your boots constantly. Your hands are covered with mittens, not gloves. Fingers together share warmth. When precision is needed, the mitten comes off briefly. You work fast, then the hand goes back into wool before numbness takes hold. None of this is cheap. To clothe a ship's crew requires enormous labour. Archaeological textile fragments from sites like Oseberg show how dense and finely constructed these garments were. A single cloak can represent weeks of work at the loom. A sail represents years. When you wear these clothes, you are wearing the labour of your household, of women who spun, wove, fulled, dyed, and repaired this fabric through long winters. Their work is the barrier between you and the sea. That is why you carry a needle. If a seam fails, you fix it immediately. A tear is not cosmetic, it is a leak in the system. You also keep yourself clean. Combs made of antler or bone are common finds in Viking graves. Grooming is not vanity. Dirt holds moisture. Moisture invites cold. parasites spread disease in tight quarters. Cleanliness keeps the system working. Even colour matters. Viking clothing is often brightly dyed, reds, yellows, blues. The dyeing process strengthens the wool slightly, but the effect is also psychological. Colour asserts presence in a grey world. It helps you see your crew through fog and spray. It reminds you that you are still human. This clothing system was not invented for ships. It comes from life on land in a place where winters are long, weather shifts suddenly, and survival depends on adaptation rather than dominance. Over generations, people learned what worked and what failed. What you are wearing is the result of that learning. It is not comfortable. It is not fashion. It is accumulated knowledge made wearable. Third, the ship itself became part of the heating system. As the ship rolls beneath your feet and freezing spray strikes your face again, you do not look for fire. There is no fire here. There never will be. Instead, your response is immediate and practiced. You pull your hood forward. You tighten the brooch at your shoulder. You feel the heavy, wet weight of wool settle against your chest. Beneath it, warmth gathers, not because the cold has eased, but because your body is still producing heat and your clothing is holding it in place. You become aware of something essential. The warmth is not coming from outside. It is coming from you. Your clothing does not generate heat on its own. It reflects it back, trapping the energy your body produces through effort and breath. In that sense, you are no longer waiting for warmth to arrive. You are carrying it with you. You are a closed system, a moving hearth, fueled by your own circulation. The cold does not rush to meet you. It does not charge forward or announce itself with sudden pain. There is no dramatic threshold where danger becomes obvious. Instead, the cold behaves patiently. It settles into the spaces around you, into the air, the wood, the water, and then it waits. It waits for fatigue. It waits for hesitation. It waits for the smallest pause. On a Viking ship, stillness is not rest. It is a risk. The moment your body stops working for more than a short time, heat begins to drain away. Not violently, not noticeably at first. It slips out, quietly. Muscles that were warm minutes ago begin to cool. Joints stiffen. Fingers lose strength before they lose feeling. Breath grows shallower without conscious notice. The cold does not need force. It only needs time. That is why work never truly stops. From the instant the ship leaves shore, movement becomes the second source of warmth, just as essential as clothing. Heat does not come from flame. It comes from muscle contraction, circulation, and sustained effort. Every task on board serves two purposes at once. It keeps the ship functioning, and it keeps the people alive. Rowing makes this relationship impossible to ignore. You take your place at the oar, feet braced wide against the deck, knees slightly bent to absorb motion. The ship is never still, and your body adapts automatically. Balance is not something you think about. It is something you maintain continuously. Your hands close around the oar. The wood is rough and cold, darkened by water and use. When the blade enters the sea, it meets resistance immediately. Water does not yield easily. You pull. The back engages first, then shoulders, arms and legs lock together into a single motion. Breath deepens. Blood surges outward from the chest, carrying warmth into fingers that moments ago felt stiff and unreliable. The effort is exhausting, but it is also protective. Each stroke generates heat. Sweat forms beneath layers of wool, but it is controlled, produced by work, not fear. The warmth spreads outward, reclaiming space the cold had begun to take. Pull, release, pull again. The rhythm settles in, not frantic, not slow, sustainable. The ship slides forward through dark water, and your body stays functional because it must. The moment the effort eases, the cold begins to return. When the oars slow, you feel it immediately. Fingers stiffen, shoulders cool. The distinction between motion and rest is clear and absolute. There is no gradual decline. Either heat is being produced or it is being lost. So the rhythm continues, even when rowing is no longer strictly necessary for speed. Rowing, however, is only one form of work. When the sail is raised, labour changes shape, but never lessens. Ropes must be hauled, tightened, eased and watched constantly. Wind shifts without warning. Wet rope stiffens. Salt crystals form in the fibres. Mittens grow slick. Grip matters. Timing matters. A missed cue can strain the rigging. A delayed response can knock someone off balance. Attention remains fixed on small details because small failures become dangerous quickly. The deck beneath your feet never stops moving. Ankles flex, knees bend, hips shift. Core muscles stay engaged, stabilizing the body against constant motion. Even when you appear still, the body is working, making dozens of small corrections every minute. Every correction produces heat. Water continues to enter the hull. No Viking ship is watertight, nor was it meant to be. The planks must flex to survive waves, and flexing allows water in. Spray blows over the sides, rain adds to it. Cold water pools in the bilge below the deck, where damp air gathers and lingers. Cold sinks. That lowest space becomes a reservoir of chill, creeping upward toward the legs. You feel it first around the ankles, then the calves. The longer water remains, the more heat it steals. So you bail. Again, and again, and again. The work is monotonous. Scoop, lift, throw. But every bucket removed reduces cold. Less water means less heat loss. Less heat loss means steadier hands and better balance. A man who bails poorly endangers everyone. A man who bails steadily warms himself while protecting the crew. Here, individual effort and collective survival are the same thing. The ship itself enforces this system. There are no enclosed cabins to retreat into, no padded benches inviting long rest. Exposure is shared equally. This is not cruelty, it is design. If comfort were available, some would take it too long. The ship removes that option. Even at night, work does not end. Someone watches the wind. Someone listens to the water against the hull. Someone keeps the ship on course. Those who rest remain half alert, shifting, adjusting, ready to move if needed. Sleep is shallow and easily broken. And yet within all this effort, a rhythm emerges. Breathing steadies. Muscles learn their demands. Heat rises and falls, but never drops too far. Over time, the cycle of movement and brief recovery becomes familiar, almost grounding. This is not suffering for its own sake, it is management. Every action on the ship serves two purposes. It moves the vessel through hostile water, and it keeps human bodies producing heat. Fire would have been simpler, a hearth would have been easier, but fire could not be trusted here. Muscle could. By the time land appears again, exhaustion is deep. Shoulders ache, hands throb, legs feel heavy and unsteady. But warmth still lingers beneath layers of wool, sustained by hours of motion. Only then does it become clear how much work the body has been doing just to stay alive. At sea, survival is not passive. Warmth is not given, it is created. And on a Viking ship, every pull of the oar, every hauled rope, every bucket of water thrown back into the sea reinforces the same reality. Movement is life, stillness is the enemy. And this is where it becomes worth asking yourself something directly. The ship is still moving beneath you. The deck is slick with spray. The wind keeps cutting through the layers you're relying on. There is no fire anywhere on board. Nothing waiting for you when your body finally needs to slow down. Be honest. Standing here like this, wrapped in wool, soaked with salt, muscles already burning. How long do you think you would last? Not how long you hope, not how long you want to believe. How many hours before the cold, the fatigue and the exposure start making decisions for you? Drop your answer in the comments. No bravado, no exaggeration, just the number. Because everything these sailors rely on, every habit, every shared rule, every system they follow, exists for one reason: to push that number farther than instinct says it should ever go. Fourth, they learned that night was not rest, it was another phase of work. The work does not truly end when night arrives, it only changes shape. For crews sailing the northern seas in the Viking Age, nightfall was not a signal to stop, but a transition into a different and often more dangerous phase of the journey. Daylight brought visibility, rhythm, and a kind of practical confidence. You could see the water, you could read the sky, you could anticipate waves and adjust the ship's angle before impact. Distance could be judged by coastline when it existed, or by the position of the sun when it did not. The sea was still hostile, but it was visible. Night removes those advantages. What remains is cold, darkness, sound, and the slow, unavoidable demand of the human body for rest. As the sun sinks toward the horizon, the energy that carried the ship through hours of rowing or sail handling begins to drain. Muscles that have worked without pause grow heavy. Hands stiffen even inside wool. Shoulders ache with a deep fatigue that settles rather than spikes. The sea darkens and loses detail, turning from a surface you can read into something you feel more than see. The horizon dissolves. The sky becomes a low ceiling of cloud, stars, or snow. For sailors used to navigating by subtle visual cues, that loss matters. The world narrows. The ship becomes a small, moving island, surrounded by emptiness. Sound replaces sight, the slap of waves against the hull, the groan of timber, the creak of rope under load. Each sound carries information. Each change in rhythm suggests a change in conditions. The ship does not stop moving. It never truly rests, but its rhythm changes. Oars are lifted and shipped, pulled inward and secured along the sides, so they do not drag or catch unexpectedly. Their blades are turned and tied. Ropes are tightened and checked one final time. Loose items are bound or wedged into place. Buckets are stacked. Tools are secured where they can be reached in the dark. Voices grow quieter, not from fear, but from conservation. Loud speech costs energy, and in cold air, every breath matters. At night, the crew listens more than it speaks. Movement becomes slower, deliberate, economical, not because danger has passed, but because the body must pace itself for what may come. This slowing is necessary. It is also dangerous. During the day, constant labour keeps heat circulating. Muscles generate warmth. Blood moves quickly. Even in freezing air, effort creates protection. At night, that protection fades. Sweat soaked into wool during the day begins to cool. Damp fabric clings to the skin. Areas that stayed warm during exertion begin to chill. Stillness allows heat to drain quietly, without warning. This is the moment the cold waits for, not during effort, not during struggle, but during a pause. The human body cannot work forever. Rest is not optional. Sleep arrives whether conditions allow it or not, and at sea, sleep is the most vulnerable state a person can enter. Awareness fades, reaction slows. The ability to respond instantly is reduced. On a Viking ship, there is no heat to gather around. Fire aboard an open wooden vessel is not managed. It is excluded. One spark carried by wind, one ember rolling across a deck, coated in tar, wool, rope, and hide would turn the ship into a trap. At sea, fire does not offer comfort. It offers catastrophe. There is no cabin below deck where warmth can be trapped. No walls to block wind, no ceiling to hold heat. A Viking longship is exactly what it appears to be. A narrow wooden platform riding directly on freezing water. Reconstructions based on finds like the Skulldalev ships confirm this openness. Nothing is hidden, nothing is enclosed, everything is exposed. Night strips away the illusion of control daylight provides. The weather cannot be seen approaching. Waves cannot be read in advance. Direction becomes uncertain when clouds cover the stars. The sea turns into vibration, sound, and motion. Wind feels sharper in the dark, more personal, as if it has found you rather than merely passing through. So the crew prepares, not for comfort, for survival. Sleep on a Viking ship is never rest in the modern sense. It does not erase fatigue or restore warmth completely. It is a controlled pause, enough recovery to function again when needed. People sleep because they must, not because safety allows it. There are no beds built into the ship, no sleeping quarters, No space designed for comfort. Viking ships are built to be light, flexible, and fast. Every plank, every beam serves movement. Anything unnecessary is removed. Extra structure adds weight. Weight increases draft. Deep draft limits landing options. Comfort at sea is not just indulgent, it reduces survivability. Sleep, therefore, is improvised. The first concern is shelter, limited as it may be. The sail that drove the ship during the day was lowered and repurposed. It is stretched across raised oars, stacked shields, or temporary supports to form a windbreak. It does not create walls, it does not seal the space. Gaps remain. Wind and spray still find their way through, but the sail disrupts airflow, and in extreme cold, disruption matters. By breaking the wind, a shallow pocket of calmer air forms beneath it. Heat lingers slightly longer before being pulled away. It is not warm, it is simply less cold. The only realistic goal on an open ship. Cold air sinks. Water pools in the bilge. The lowest part of the ship remains damp and heavy with chill. Anyone resting directly above it loses heat quickly. So sleeping positions are chosen carefully. Bodies lie slightly higher, where planks are drier, where cold pools less aggressively. Even a few inches matter. There is no bedding waiting to be unfolded. Cloaks are spread across the deck. Extra garments are folded beneath hips and shoulders. Animal hides create a barrier between flesh and wood. The deck remains hard and uneven, but insulation slows heat loss. Comfort is irrelevant, resistance is everything. Then comes the most important rule of night survival. No one sleeps alone. A single body loses heat too quickly. Shivering burns energy without restoring warmth. Exhaustion weakens the body's ability to generate heat at all. Two bodies pressed together lose heat more slowly. Several bodies clustered tightly create a shared pocket of warmth. So the crew sleeps together, shoulder to shoulder, back to back, knees drawn in, cloaks overlapping, hoods pulled low. Privacy disappears because it has no survival value here. This closeness is not unusual. Shared sleeping was common in longhouses on land. At sea, it becomes essential. Heat builds between bodies. Where one person would shiver continuously, a group can rest, not comfortably, but effectively. Shared hide sleeping bags are sometimes used, thick, treated, water-resistant. Two people slide inside and seal the opening as best they can. Faces remain exposed so moisture from breath can escape. Frost forms on beards and brows, but torsos stay warm enough for circulation to continue. Sleep comes in fragments. The ship never stops moving. Waves strike the hull irregularly. Ropes creak. Wind snaps at the sail overhead. The deck flexes beneath resting bodies. Every vibration travels through wood into bone. Deep sleep is rare, and safer that way. In extreme colds, total unconsciousness is dangerous. Shivering may stop. Heat loss accelerates. Light, broken sleep keeps the mind near waking, ready to respond. Someone is always awake. Night watches rotate. A watchkeeper listens for changes in wave rhythm, feels shifts in wind, watches the sky when visibility allows. This is not a ceremony. It is survival work. Sleep is rationed. Exhaustion is managed. No one rests long enough to become useless. Those who are injured or weakened are placed closer to the center of the cluster, where warmth is strongest. Stronger bodies take the edges. This is not debated. Experience guides it. And rest can end instantly. A gust snaps the sail shelter. A wave breaks higher than expected. Someone calls out. Bodies separate. Cloaks are grabbed. Stiff limbs move despite protest. Sleep dissolves back into action without hesitation. This is the rhythm of night at sea. Awkward, intimate, controlled. When morning finally returns, it arrives gradually. Light creeps back into the sky. The horizon reappears. Detail returns to water and wood. Bodies rise stiff and aching, but alive. Another night has survived without fire, without walls, without true rest. Warmth was not found, it was shared. And without this system, Without this negotiation with darkness and cold, no voyage, no trade mission, no exploration across the northern seas would ever reach its end. Fifth, they learned that the only reliable fire at sea was the one inside the body, and that fire had to be fed. By the time a Viking ship has been at sea for several days, a hard truth becomes impossible to ignore. Cold is not an enemy you can defeat through strength or determination. It cannot be struck, driven back, or overcome by courage. The cold is constant. It surrounds the ship, seeps through wood and cloth, and presses inward without pause. It does not attack directly. Instead, it waits. It exposes every weakness in preparation, every mistake in planning, every miscalculation in endurance. Out on open water, cold is pressure. It is pressure that squeezes time out of the body. The longer the voyage continues, the more the crew understands that the sea is not trying to kill them in a dramatic way. It is simply removing options. It is eroding reserves. It is narrowing the margin for error until the smallest failure, an untreated blister, a missed meal, a badly timed watch, becomes a turning point. Clothing, movement, and shared sleep can slow the advance of cold, but none of them can replace one thing: fuel. Wool traps heat only if the body is still producing heat. Shared warmth only exists if bodies still have energy to give. Even the smartest routines fail the moment the body begins to starve. And on a Viking ship, energy does not come from comfort, warmth, or rest. It comes from food. Food at sea has nothing to do with taste. It has nothing to do with ceremony or pleasure, at least not in the way those words belong to land. Out here, the meaning of food is stripped down to one purpose: keeping the internal fire alive long enough to reach the next shore. The human body is a heat engine. In cold environments, it burns fuel relentlessly. It burns fuel while rowing. It burns fuel while standing watch. It burns fuel while hauling rope. It burns fuel even while lying still beneath a sailcloth at night, because maintaining body temperature is never free. Even sleep consumes energy. Even rest costs calories. The colder the environment, the faster that fuel disappears, and the faster the body drifts toward the edge of weakness. Without constant replenishment, warmth fades from the inside out. The fingers go numb first because the body protects the core, then toes, then the edges of the face and ears. Muscles weaken, reaction time stretches, judgment dulls. The cold does not need to strike, it simply waits for the body to run out of something to burn. One fact reshapes everything about eating at sea: there is no cooking fire. That single limitation defines the entire system of nourishment aboard a Viking ship. No fire means no boiling water, no hot broth, no pot simmering at the end of the day, no steam rising to warm hands and faces, no scent of cooking to lift morale in the dark. Everything eaten aboard must already be prepared, preserved, and ready to consume in cold, wet, unstable conditions, often with numb hands and a ship that will not stop moving. Meals are cold, they are hard, they are repetitive, and they are intentional. Every item carried aboard is chosen not for pleasure, but for reliability. It must survive salt air and damp storage. It must be compact, dense with energy, and edible without preparation. It must tolerate rough handling. It must keep working even when the crew is exhausted and appetite fades. This is not casual eating, it is planning turned into food. Before the ship ever touches the water, the entire voyage is imagined in supplies. How many mouths must be fed? How many days might be spent offshore if winds turn unfavourable? How long a crew might have to wait out bad weather along a bleak coastline? Food is packed not for the journey the crew hopes for, but for the journey the sea might demand. At the centre of this system is dried fish. Long before the ship moves, fish are processed on shore. They are split open, cleaned, salted or air-dried depending on local practice, and laid out so wind and cold can draw moisture out of the flesh until it becomes firm, dense, and resistant to decay. In northern climates, preservation can happen without flame. The environment itself becomes the drying rack. cod becomes the cornerstone. Not because it is luxurious, not because it is celebrated, but because it is dependable. Cod dries exceptionally well. When prepared correctly, it resists rot and can be stored for long periods without becoming useless. It weighs far less than fresh meat, yet still carries concentrated nutrition. For long voyages where space is narrow and weight matters, that ratio, light to carry, hard to spoil, steady to eat, turns cod into survival itself. Eating it is a necessity, not enjoyment. The flesh is hard, sometimes brittle, sometimes leathery. It does not fall apart easily. Pieces are torn off or cut with a knife. Chewing becomes work. The jaw moves slowly, deliberately, because cold stiffens the muscles of the face as surely as it stiffens the hands. Salt lingers on the tongue. The taste is flat. The texture is stubborn. There is no warmth and no softness to make eating easy, but there is strength. Protein flows into muscles damaged by constant labour. Rowing strains, shoulders, backs and arms, hour after hour. Balancing on a moving deck taxes the legs and core continuously. Rope work tears at hands. Cold tightens joints and slows recovery. Without protein, the body cannot repair itself fast enough. Small injuries grow. Fatigue deepens into weakness. And on a ship, weakness is never private. A tired rower slows the ship. A weakened sailor loses balance. A delayed reaction during a sudden maneuver can cost lives. Dried fish does not inspire, but it sustains. It keeps the body functional when conditions constantly pull it toward failure. Protein alone, however, is not enough. A body fighting cold also needs fuel that burns steadily. Fuel that turns quickly into usable energy when the ship demands. Another hour at the oar, another rush to tighten lines, another stretch of tense watchfulness. That role belongs to carbohydrates. This is where hard bread enters the system. This bread is not meant to be soft, fresh or fragrant. It is baked dry and dense, so moisture cannot take hold and spoil it. Sometimes it resembles a thick biscuit more than a loaf. Sometimes it is so hard it must be soaked briefly in water to avoid breaking teeth. It can be stacked, transported, handled roughly, and still remains edible. It is plain, sometimes sour, sometimes nearly tasteless, but it does something crucial. It powers. Carbohydrates provide accessible energy. They support muscle function and mental focus over long periods. While protein repairs, carbohydrates drive the engine. Without them, strength falters quickly and the body begins consuming its own reserves too fast, burning itself to keep warm. Hard bread is carried in quantity because it lasts. It does not demand attention. It waits quietly until needed. And because it is simple, it remains tolerable even when appetite fades. When fatigue dulls hunger, when nausea rises in rough seas, a few bites can still be forced down, and those calories can still become heat. Together, dried fish and hard bread form the backbone of nourishment at sea. But the most valuable resource of all is fat. Fat is warmth in its most concentrated form. Gram for gram, fat carries more than twice the energy of protein or carbohydrates. In cold environments, that matters in a way the body understands immediately. Fat burns slowly. It releases energy and heat over time. It supports endurance, not just in work, but in the long stretches between work, especially at night, when movement stops and the body must hold temperature through stillness. Animal fat, butter, tallow, and rendered oil are carried in smaller quantities, but treated with immense seriousness. They are stored carefully, guarded from waste. A smear of fat on bread changes a meal from mere maintenance into real endurance fuel. It steadies energy, it makes hunger quieter, it softens the steep drop that comes when the body runs on bread alone. Out here, fat is not indulgence, it is survival. A small portion can mean the difference between shivering endlessly through the night and maintaining enough warmth to rest. It becomes a silent ally in the coldest hours, when the crew lies still under sailcloth and depends on the body's slow burn to keep the core alive. Porridge plays a smaller but meaningful role. Made from grains such as barley or oats, porridge is usually prepared during shore stops, when fire is safe. It is then cooled, thickened and packed. At sea, it is eaten cold, or stiffened into a dense mass that can be cut or broken apart. It does not comfort the way warm porridge would, but it fills the stomach, and in cold environments, fullness matters. It slows hunger, it gives steady energy. It also breaks monotony in texture, which matters more than it sounds. Monotony at sea is not only mental, it is physical. Appetite fades when the same foods repeat endlessly, even when the body desperately needs calories. A change in texture, tough fish one moment, dense grain the next, can make eating possible when fatigue dulls the desire for food. What stands out most is the absence of heat in the act of eating. There is no bowl to cradle, no steam to warm the face, no moment when a hot mouthful brings immediate relief. Instead, warmth arrives later, quietly, invisibly, after digestion begins, after nutrients are absorbed, after the body finally has something to burn. This is not a theory aboard the ship. It is learned in the body. Eat, and sometime later, the cold feels less sharp. Fingers regain feeling. Shivering eases, not because the food was warm, but because the internal furnace has been fed. That makes timing critical. Meals are not eaten randomly. Eating before long shifts of rowing helps prevent sudden collapse. Eating before standing watch reduces errors. Eating before sleep helps maintain warmth through the night, when movement stops and shared body heat must carry the burden. Food becomes part of thermal strategy. It is not simply eating when hungry, it is eating to stay functional, eating to prevent mistakes, eating to preserve strength for moments when weather shifts and the ship demands sudden effort. Salt becomes central to this system. Salt preserves food, but it also replaces what the body loses through sweat. Even in freezing air, heavy labour causes sweating beneath wool. Salt loss leads to cramps, weakness, dizziness, and confusion, conditions especially dangerous on a moving ship. A cramp can cause a fall. A confused sailor can miss a command. A weakened body can fail during a critical moment. Salted fish and preserved foods naturally supply what the crew needs. This is not accidental. It is a result of long experience. What kept people functional survived as practice. Water, however, remains precious. Fresh water must be carried in containers or gathered during shore stops. It cannot be wasted. Drinking too much risks running out before land is reached. Drinking too little leads to dehydration, which worsens fatigue, thickens blood, slows circulation, and accelerates heat loss. Cold makes dehydration deceptive. Thirst fades, sweat is hidden beneath layers, but water still leaves the body through breath and exertion. So balance becomes essential. Experienced sailors learn to sip rather than gulp. They learn to read subtle warnings, headache, slowed focus, cramps that suggest more than cold. They understand that hunger and thirst blur together in low temperatures, and that the body's signals are not always clean or honest. Food is eaten communally. Supplies are shared because division breeds resentment, and resentment weakens cooperation. On a ship, cooperation is survival. A crew that argues over rations becomes distracted, inefficient, and dangerous. So the fare is shared and paced, not because equality is an ideal, but because unity is required. Eating together also creates rhythm. In an environment where days blur and nights stretch, meals mark time. They break monotony. They provide structure. They remind the crew that the voyage is moving forward and that survival is still being managed, not surrendered. The simplicity of this diet reflects the land that produced it. Scandinavia was never a place of easy abundance. Short growing seasons, poor soil, and unpredictable weather forced communities to rely on preservation long before ships ever sailed. Drying, salting, smoking, fermenting, these were not specialties. They were necessities. Archaeological sites tied to Viking trade and settlement including places like Hedeby and Birka, show how central fish and grain were to daily life, not as luxuries but as staples that could be stored and moved. At sea, preservation is not tradition, it is life, and it has its own rules. Underfeeding weakens the body, overeating wastes supplies. Eating too little invites cold to creep inward. Eating too much at once can leave limbs heavy, digestion pulling energy inward when the ship might demand sudden action. The crew learns these boundaries through experience. Older sailors guide younger ones through habit and example, when to eat, how to pace, how to keep the internal fire steady rather than letting it spike and crash. By the time the ship reaches land again, bodies are lean, depleted, and exhausted, but alive. And when fire is finally safe again, the contrast becomes overwhelming. Hot food feels almost unreal. Steam against the face feels shocking. The smell of cooking becomes a signal to the nervous system that recovery is possible. Only then does it become clear how much work the body has been doing simply to stay warm. At sea, warmth never came from flame or shelter. It came from the body's ability to turn simple, cold food into heat, motion, and endurance. And once that internal fire is understood, the next part of the voyage becomes clearer too. The sea can be endured, but only in stretches, because eventually, every crew must reach the place where real flame can burn safely again. Sixth, they treated landfall as part of the design, because fire belonged to shore, not to the ship. For days, balance has required constant adjustment. Muscles have worked continuously, even during sleep. When that effort suddenly becomes unnecessary, your legs feel weak. Some men stumble stepping onto land, not from collapse but from the sudden absence of motion, as if the ground is too still to trust. The cold does not disappear, but it changes. On land, cold is no longer reinforced by spray from every direction. It no longer rises endlessly from beneath the hull. Your body is still chilled, still damp in places, still carrying fatigue in the joints, but the assault has stopped being constant. The wind can be blocked, the ground does not pitch, and the air, for the first time in days, can be shaped. The first priority is always fire. Not shelter, not sleep, fire. Wood is gathered immediately. Driftwood from the shore, fallen branches, scrub, anything dry enough to catch. Men move with practiced urgency because they know exactly what happens if the fire is delayed. Wet wool stays wet, hands stay numb, and the body remains trapped in the sea's tempo. Now there is no need for caution. No sail overhead, no tarred seams beneath, no rope coils waiting to ignite. Fires are built large, fast and without restraint. Flames rise openly, light spills outward. Heat pushes back the cold in a way nothing at sea ever could. Radiant, immediate, unquestionable. You feel it before you even reach it. Faces turn toward the glow. Hands extend automatically. Shoulders loosen without permission. Wool begins to steam as moisture evaporates. Boots are loosened, feet are dried. Cloaks are spread across rocks, bushes, or makeshift lines so wind and heat can finally do what the ship would not allow: reset the body. For the first time since leaving shore, you stop producing warmth and begin receiving it. That transition matters more than comfort suggests. At sea, warmth is fragile. It must be generated constantly. It disappears the moment work stops. On land, warmth can remain even while you sit still. That single difference changes posture, breathing, and mental state almost immediately. The jaw unclenches. The shoulders drop. The mind stops scanning for the next task long enough to notice how tired it is. Cooking begins as soon as the fire is stable. Water is boiled, and this alone feels extraordinary. Hot liquid entering the body reaches deeper than cold water ever could. It relaxes the stomach. It warms the core. It signals safety on a biological level, like the body recognizes the old pattern. Flame nearby means the world has rules again. Food that has been eaten cold for days is transformed. Dried fish softens and releases aroma. Hard bread absorbs moisture and becomes chewable without a struggle. Porridge that was stiff or cold becomes warm and pliable again. Sometimes fresh food appears. Shellfish gathered from rocks, fish caught nearby, birds taken if opportunity allows, seaweed or edible plants collected along the edges. These additions are not indulgence, they are repaired. Hot food does more than feed muscle, it resets systems. Digestion improves, circulation rises, muscles unclench. Shivering eases in a way it never fully can under sailcloth. Sleep, when it finally comes, becomes deeper and longer. The constant edge of alertness, kept alive at sea because it had to be, begins to fade. While some tend the fire and food, others turn to the ship. The Longship is never ignored during these pauses. Salt water degrades everything. It creeps into seams, it stiffens rope. It weakens wood fibres and eats away at small failures until they become dangerous. Landfall provides the first real chance to stop improvising and start repairing. Planks are examined closely, seams are checked for gaps, pitch and tar are reheated and reapplied where the hull needs sealing. Ropes are dried, recoiled, and inspected for wear. The sail is spread out to dry and repaired where stitching has failed or fabric has torn. Oars are checked carefully because a single cracked oar is not an inconvenience in heavy seas. It is a missing limb. The ship, like the crew, requires recovery. This is why landing sites are rarely random. Over time, certain locations become known and reused. Sheltered bays with easy approaches, beaches where ships can be pulled up safely, river mouths with reliable fresh water. These places form a practical coastal memory, carried by sailors and passed through families and crews. In places like the Norwegian coast and along island chains leading west, that network becomes the difference between an ambitious voyage and a fatal one. Later reconstructions and replica voyages, often inspired by finds such as the Skulldalev ships, have shown something simple but unforgiving. Even with modern planning, the sea punishes delay, and the crew's ability to dry out, eat hot food, and restore strength on shore is what keeps the next crossing possible. Some stops are brief, just long enough to cook dry clothing, sleep properly, and continue. The fire burns hot and fast, like a final purge set loose before the sea can claim more than it already has. Other stops last days. And when conditions become too dangerous, especially as seasons turn, winter camps are established. Wintering is not failure, it is wisdom. The sea in winter is a different creature than the sea in summer. Storms intensify, daylight shortens, ice forms along coastlines and sometimes along rigging. Navigation becomes less reliable when cloud and darkness dominate. Many voyages pause entirely until conditions improve. Not because sailors lose courage, but because experience teaches what winter water demands. During wintering periods, ships are pulled fully out of the water and stored. Hulls are supported. Temporary shelters are built using turf, wood and sailcloth. Fires burn constantly. Life slows into maintenance rather than motion. Hunting supplements, stored food. Fishing continues in rivers and sheltered waters. Equipment is repaired thoroughly. Men rest, heal, regain strength, and rebuild the reserves that the sea constantly erodes. These camps are not always isolated. They become centres of activity. Trade happens, information is exchanged, news travels, crews shift. Some members leave, others join. Plans change based on rumours, opportunities, and threats. The ship connects worlds rather than replacing them. Even during raids or long-distance journeys, the rhythm holds. Ships move quickly, then return to the coast to recover. Inland travel follows rivers when possible because rivers offer the same advantages as the sea: movement, water, and predictable stopping points. The Longship is not a floating home meant to drift endlessly. It is a tool meant to reach the places where recovery is possible. The image of Vikings roaming the ocean without pause is a modern exaggeration. Their success came from knowing when not to be at sea. Fire on land serves purposes beyond warmth and cooking. It dries equipment thoroughly, it reduces parasites in clothing, it restores morale. Around the fire, stories are told. Plans are discussed, disputes are resolved, bonds are reinforced. At sea, conversation is limited by cold wind and fatigue. On shore, speech returns fully. Laughter comes more easily. Songs are sung. The crew becomes human again, not just bodies managing risk. Psychologically, shore time is essential. Life at sea demands constant vigilance. A misstep can mean injury, a mistake can mean death. On land, that tension eases. The mind can rest, sleep becomes deeper and less guarded. The body, no longer forced to generate every degree of warmth through effort, finally begins to repair itself rather than merely endure. And these coastal places are not empty. Families live nearby. Children, elders, and whole communities are often present. The ship is not the entire world. It is a bridge between worlds where life actually happens. Where cloth is woven, food is preserved, tools are repaired, and stories are carried forward. This rhythm explains how long voyages across hostile waters become possible. They are not conquered in a single push, they are broken into pieces. Each stretch of open water ends at land. Each landing restores what the sea has taken. Even legendary crossings to Iceland, Greenland, and beyond follow this logic. Islands become stepping stones. Camps are established. Fires burn. The journey is never a ship against the ocean alone. Without this system, survival collapses. Clothing stays wet. Bodies weaken. Food is consumed without recovery. Sleep deprivation dulls judgment. The sea wins not through drama, but through slow erosion, until a small failure becomes the last one. The genius of Viking seafaring lies not in defiance of nature, but in cooperation with it. They did not try to live permanently on the ocean. They used it as a path, and they returned again and again to the places where fire could burn freely. When the time comes to depart once more, the transition is deliberate. Fires are allowed to die down, cloaks are dry and repacked, food supplies are reorganized, water containers are filled, the ship is lighter, stronger, ready again. Bodies feel restored, but no one mistakes restoration for safety. The sea is still there, waiting. As the ship pushes off and the shoreline recedes, the old rhythm resumes. Shore to sea, sea to shore. Each crossing was measured. Each pause is intentional. Each decision is guided by restraint rather than bravado. This is how Vikings crossed cold waters without fire aboard their ships. Not by living without warmth, but by knowing exactly where warmth belonged and returning to it before the sea could take more than it was ever meant to give. Finally, they learned that cold is not just something you feel, it is something you negotiate with your mind. The cold you feel on a Viking ship is not constant. It shifts, changes, and reshapes itself over time. At one moment it is sharp and immediate, biting exposed skin, turning fingers clumsy within minutes. At another, it is dull and heavy, pressing inward without urgency, settling into muscles and joints until it feels permanent. You learn quickly that cold is not a single sensation. It is a condition that evolves, adapting to wind, moisture, exhaustion, movement, and time. But the most dangerous cold is not the one that hurts the most. The most dangerous cold is the one that becomes familiar. It is the cold that stops feeling urgent, the cold that convinces you that discomfort is endless and that effort changes nothing. It whispers that stopping would be easier than continuing, that stillness might feel like relief, even though stillness carries its own risks. This is not a failure of muscle or clothing. It is a failure of momentum, a failure of will. That is why survival at sea is never only physical. By this stage of the voyage, the physical systems are already in place and working. Wool slows heat loss. Layers trap air. Movement generates warmth. Food feeds the internal fire. Shared sleep preserves what little energy can be saved. Shore fires, when they come, restore what the sea drains away. These systems are proven, they function, but none of them work without one final element: the mind. If the mind disengages, the system collapses, A sailor who stops believing effort matters rows less effectively. A watchkeeper who drifts into apathy misses changes in wind or wave rhythm. A crew member who sinks into despair spreads it quietly to those around him. Fatigue multiplies, attention dulls. The sea does not need to overpower the body if the will to respond has already eroded. This is where belief enters, not as abstract philosophy, but as structure. On a Viking ship, belief is practical. It is not debated endlessly. It is not ornamental. It exists to stabilize behavior under extreme uncertainty. It shapes how fear is processed, how pain is interpreted, and how long hardship can be endured without tipping into panic, paralysis, or recklessness. In a world where storms arrive without warning and death can come without explanation, belief provides a framework that makes uncertainty survivable. At the center of that framework is fate, the idea that life unfolds along a path already set does not remove danger. It removes fixation. If death is not random, if it arrives when it must, then fear loses its power to dominate every decision. You do not become careless. Instead, attention narrows to what remains within control. The oar must be pulled correctly. The sail must be trimmed. The rope must be tied properly. The watch must be kept. The body must keep moving. What lies beyond control is surrendered. What remains becomes the only focus. At sea, this distinction is critical. The ocean does not respond to anxiety. Worry does not calm waves or steady a ship. What anxiety does is drain focus, fragment morale, and spread unease through a crew already under strain. A belief in fate does not deny risk, it contains it. It prevents the mind from exhausting itself on futures that cannot be influenced. Acceptance here is not passive, it is stabilizing. Honor operates alongside fate as a second anchor. On a Viking ship, honor is not proven through dramatic defiance or reckless courage. It is proven through reliability, through showing up to work when exhausted, through standing watch when cold and half awake, through maintaining control when conditions make control itself difficult. Honor is not about how you appear, it is about whether others can depend on you. In an environment where survival depends entirely on shared effort, reputation becomes a form of safety. A sailor known to remain steady under pressure becomes someone others instinctively trust. A sailor who complains endlessly, withdraws or panics becomes a liability, not because he is weak, but because weakness spreads. This is not cruelty, it is a necessity. A single person breaking mentally can endanger everyone. Calm, on the other hand, is contagious. Steadiness anchors the group. Others take cues from it, consciously or not. Order holds. This is why endurance, not comfort, dominates Viking storytelling. The sagas do not celebrate ease, they celebrate persistence. Men are remembered not for avoiding hardship, but for remaining functional within it. They cross seas, endure hunger, survive storms, and continue acting when fear and exhaustion press hardest. These stories are not entertainment alone. They are instructions. They circulate before voyages and after them. They teach expectations. They reinforce behavior. They provide mental templates for how one is meant to respond when the conditions become hostile. In this way, culture itself becomes equipment, no less important than wool or rope. This matters deeply. Aboard a ship, when cold becomes constant, when sleep is shallow and broken, when food is repetitive and joyless, the mind searches for meaning. Suffering without meaning feels endless, arbitrary. It drains motivation faster than physical exhaustion ever could. Belief reframes discomfort as a test rather than a threat. Storytelling reinforces this constantly. Stories are told while working, while bailing, repairing rigging, or huddled beneath a sailcloth at night. They recount storms survived, mistakes made, lessons learned. They do not glorify recklessness. They emphasize patience, cooperation, and restraint. This continuity matters. Isolation is one of the sea's most powerful weapons. When hardship feels unique, fear intensifies. When it is framed as part of a long chain of shared experience, it becomes finite. Stories compress time. They place the present moment inside a broader narrative, rather than letting it feel like an unprecedented crisis. Storytelling also serves a practical purpose. It occupies attention. The mind cannot fully fixate on cold and pain while following a narrative. Discomfort does not vanish, but it recedes. Time moves differently. This is not accidental. Narrative has always been a tool for endurance. Humour plays a quieter role. It is dry, understated, sometimes bleak. Jokes about weather that will never improve, about a ship that sounds ready to fall apart, about shared misery. Humour acknowledges reality without surrendering to it. Even brief laughter changes breathing, loosens tension, and resets emotional tone. On a freezing deck, those small physiological shifts matter. Play serves a similar function. Simple contests, tests of balance on a moving deck, small challenges of strength or coordination. These are not distractions. They keep bodies lightly active. They maintain reflexes. More importantly, they assert normalcy. They signal that life continues, that identity is not reduced entirely to endurance. Shared hardship accelerates bonds. Sleeping pressed together, sharing limited food, relying on the same routines, strips away many divisions that exist on land. Status matters less. Everyone is cold, everyone is tired, everyone depends on everyone else. Conflict does not disappear, but it cannot be allowed to grow. On a ship, unresolved tension becomes dangerous. Grudges fracture cooperation. Anger dulls attention. Disputes are settled quickly, suppressed temporarily, or postponed until landfall. Emotional regulation becomes another survival skill. Learned, reinforced, expected. This mindset reshapes pain itself. The cold hurts, fatigue hurts, hunger hurts. But these sensations are anticipated, normalized. Pain becomes information rather than alarm. It signals adjustment, not collapse. Modern people often interpret prolonged discomfort as failure. On a Viking ship, discomfort is part of the environment. It is managed, not dramatized. Belief in an afterlife strengthens this framing. Death is not annihilation, but transition. This does not remove caution. It removes paralysis. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to act while fear exists. Belief provides the scaffolding that allows fear to be present without becoming dominant. These beliefs do not replace practical systems. They support them. A sailor who believes suffering has meaning rows longer. A watchkeeper who values honour stays alert. A crew member who trusts the group sleeps when needed. Pressed against others, knowing shared warmth is safer than isolation. This is the final layer of the system. Vikings survived icy sea voyages without fire, not because they were immune to cold, fear or exhaustion, but because they organised their lives around those realities. They anticipated discomfort. They shared it. They gave it structure, limits and meaning. On a frozen sea, belief becomes insulation. And without it, no amount of wool, muscle or food would ever be enough. The voyage ends quietly. There is no single moment that announces it, no dramatic signal that suffering has officially concluded. Instead, it arrives gradually, almost unnoticed at first. The ship enters calmer water. The waves lose their sharp edge. The horizon stops shifting so violently. Then, finally, the keel scrapes against land. Sand, gravel or stone resist the hull in a way the sea never does. And then the motion stops. The deck no longer moves beneath your feet. The constant adjustment, the subtle shifting of muscles, the unconscious balancing that has ruled every waking and sleeping moment, simply ends. Your body sways for a moment, uncertain how to exist without movement. Some stumble when they step onto land, not because they are weak, but because stillness feels unfamiliar. The cold does not vanish instantly, but it changes. Wind no longer strikes from all directions at once. Spray no longer creeps into every fold of clothing. The ground absorbs sound and vibration instead of amplifying it. You are still chilled and exhausted, but the pressure eases. The cold loosens its grip, not because it has been defeated, but because the environment has shifted. Fire appears again. Not carefully contained or cautiously imagined, but real, open, deliberate, unapologetic. Flames rise without fear of disaster. Smoke drifts freely. Heat spreads outward, not earned through effort, but given freely. Hands extend toward it instinctively. Faces turn toward the glow. Wool steams as moisture finally leaves fabric completely. For the first time since leaving shore, warmth does not have to be generated. It can be received. Food follows quickly. Not food endured, but food transformed. Water is boiled, fish softens, grains loosen, fat melts, steam rises, carrying scent as well as heat. Eating becomes something different now. It is no longer a calculation. It is restoration. Only in this moment, standing on solid ground, surrounded by flame, warmth and stillness, does the full weight of the voyage become clear. Not because fire saved you, because you survived without it. First, the crew accepted the brutal truth that shaped everything. Fire and ships were fundamentally incompatible. That is not a metaphor. It is physics and material reality. A longship is timber, rope, wool, hides and, most dangerously, tar and pitch worked into seams and coatings. One careless ember, and the vessel becomes a torch with nowhere to run. The sagas understand this logic, even when they describe it indirectly. Ships are constantly threatened by storms, by bad luck, by human error. Add flame to that list, and you invite the one disaster you cannot outrow, outbail, or outfight. Archaeology makes the same point in another language. The Skulldalev ships, those 5 vessels found at Roskilde Fjord, show how light and open these ships were built to be. Flexible hulls, minimal structure. Above deck, everything optimized for speed and beaching, not for containing hazards. The ship is meant to move, to land, to launch again, not to carry a hearth. So at sea, fire is not withheld because something is missing. It is withheld because something is understood. Second, they learned to wear their warmth instead of building it. This is where your clothing stops being clothes and becomes architecture. Wool that keeps insulating even when damp. Cloaks that break wind and seal gaps. Hoods that protect ears and neck. Repairs made immediately because a torn seam is not a fashion problem. It is a leak in your defences. Nothing here is aesthetic first. Even status pieces, brooches, fine trim, still earn their place by doing a job. On land, these things might be seen. At sea, they are buried under layers, working quietly. The design priority is simple. Slow heat loss long enough for your body to keep producing heat. Third, the ship itself became part of the heating system, whether it meant to or not. Not because the ship is warm, because it is not, but because the ship forces motion, and motion creates heat. The deck never stops moving. Balance is constant work. Tasks rotate, so no one collapses. Bailing keeps cold water from pooling and stealing heat upward. Rope work keeps hands from going stiff for too long. Rowing is the most obvious example. Your body becomes a furnace because it has to. The oar is not just propulsion, it is the thing that keeps blood moving. Even when there is no dramatic labour underway, the ship does not allow complete stillness. Ankles flex, knees adjust, feet correct. The vessel demands engagement, and that engagement, hour after hour, becomes survival. Fourth, they learn to sleep like a crew, not like individuals. At sea, sleep is never a private retreat. It is a shared strategy. Bodies cluster because bodies are heat sources. Cloaks overlap because gaps are where cold winds. Hides and sailcloth break the wind just enough to make the difference between shivering without rest and sleeping in fragments that are still useful. You wake often. You do not sink into comfort, but you recover just enough to keep working. This is where a long voyage reveals something modern imagination often misses. The ship is not just wood and sail. It is a social machine. If one person fails, workload shifts and risk spreads. The crew survives because it stays coherent, physically close, behaviourally disciplined, emotionally contained. Fifth, they treated food as fuel for an internal fire that never gets to go out. At sea, you do not eat for pleasure. You eat to keep the engine running. Cold, repetitive meals, dried fish, hard bread, dense grains, fat wherever it can be carried, feed the furnace inside your ribs. The food is not warm in your mouth. It becomes warm later, after digestion turns it into energy. Timing matters, portions matter, waste matters, appetite fades sometimes, but eating remains mandatory, because cold waits for weakness and hunger creates it. This is one of the reasons shore matters so much. Not simply because you can cook, but because you can reset. Boiled water, warm food, a real fire that warms without effort, that is not luxury, it is repair. Sixth, they planned the voyage as a rhythm between sea and land, not as endless exposure. Harbours and shorelines are not optional conveniences. They are structural necessities. The sea is crossed in pieces, each piece ending where fire can burn safely, where water can be gathered, where clothing can be dried, where the ship can be checked and repaired. Even the longest leaps, toward Iceland or Greenland, fit into this logic of staging, timing, and landfall before reserves collapse. The Longship's shallow draft and beaching design are not just tactical advantages for raids, they are survival features for cold travel. This is also where a named record matters. The Greenland voyages described in the Saga of the Greenlanders and Eric the Red's saga are not written as cosy adventures. They are full of calculation. Weather windows, dangerous waters, precarious landings, the constant need to secure resources. Even when the prose turns heroic, the underlying reality is logistical. You do not stay out there longer than you have to. Finally, the mind was prepared as deliberately as the rigging. Belief was not abstract theology, it was a psychological structure. Fate absorbed uncertainty, so fear would not dominate attention. Honour enforced cooperation, when exhaustion made conflict tempting. Stories created continuity when isolation threatened morale. Humour relieved pressure when silence became dangerous. These beliefs were not decorations, they were tools, and they worked because they supported the practical system already in place, because they kept people steady enough to keep doing the right things, in the right order, day after day. This reality is often lost. Vikings are commonly remembered as raiders, as figures of chaos, violence, and raw aggression. But survival at sea reveals something different. Planners, builders, observers of weather, materials, and human limits. People who understood that courage without preparation is not bravery, it is waste. They did not conquer the cold by ignoring it. They acknowledged it. They respected it. They built their lives around enduring it without breaking. And yes, the contrast with modern comfort is striking. But it only takes one clear image to understand it. You can step into a warm room and forget the weather exists. On a Viking deck, you cannot forget it for even a minute. The Vikings crossed icy seas without fire aboard their ships, not because they were reckless, but because they were exact. They knew where warmth came from. They knew how long it lasted. They knew what it cost. Every choice, clothing, movement, sleep, food, planning, belief, was shaped by a single, relentless question. How do you stay alive out here? And the answer was never one trick. It was never strength alone, never courage alone, never believe alone. It was a system refined over generations, tested by storms, hunger, exhaustion, and loss. Adjusted through failure as much as success. A system that did not promise comfort, safety, or ease, but promised survival if followed carefully. The voyage ends quietly, but what it reveals endures. It reveals that survival is not dramatic. It is methodical, it is cooperative, it is patient, and it depends not on ignoring hardship, but on understanding it well enough to live with it. That is how Vikings crossed cold seas without fire, and that knowledge, once learned, does not fade when the ship reaches shore. If you enjoyed this journey into Viking reality, make sure you subscribe to Viking Times so you never miss an episode. And tell me in the comments which city or country you're watching from. I want to see where the Viking crew is tuning in from around the world.